The gold necklace caught Ethan Cole's eye first. A flash of recognition, sharp and undeniable, even from across the street. He slammed the brakes. It couldn't be. His heart pounded against his ribs, his breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. The rain poured down in sheets, turning the city into a blur of lights and shadows, but Ethan saw her clearly, the woman sitting against the cold brick wall, her knees drawn up to her chest, soaked to the bone. Wearing his mother's necklace. For a moment, he couldn't move. His fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles whitened. That necklace. He had seen it last 18 years ago, the night his mother vanished without a trace. It was her most cherished possession, an heirloom passed down through generations. Ethan had spent nearly 2 decades haunted by her disappearance, and now, impossibly, here it was, hanging around the neck of a stranger on a rain-soaked street corner. He bolted from the car, slamming the door behind him. The cold rain hit his face like needles, but he didn't care. He had to know. Hey! His voice cut through the downpour as he rushed across the street, water splashing up from the puddles with every step. The woman didn't move. She sat still, her head hanging low, dark strands of hair plastered to her pale skin. When he reached her, the sight hit him even harder than he'd expected. She looked lost, broken. Like someone who had forgotten what warmth and safety even felt like. But the necklace, his mother's necklace, gleamed around her throat, a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. Where did you get that? His voice trembled as he knelt down in front of her, his eyes locked on the gold pendant. Where did you get that necklace? The woman slowly lifted her head, her eyes dull, as if the world had drained the life from her long ago. I don't know, she whispered. Her voice was cracked, weak, like it hadn't been used in days. Ethan's chest tightened. That necklace, he started, but the words caught in his throat. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her warm smile, her laugh that filled their home, the way she had kissed him goodnight. And then the pain, the confusion, the unanswered questions that had gnawed at him for years. 18 years. He grabbed the pendant gently, his fingers trembling. The engraving was still there, barely visible in the dim light, a delicate pattern of vines and flowers, a symbol of his family. He swallowed hard, the rain mixing with the tears he didn't even realize were falling. You don't know? His voice was sharp now, cutting through the night air. How can you not know? This belonged to he stopped, pulling back. He didn't trust her yet. He couldn't. The woman blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused. She looked at him as though he were a ghost, something unreal. I don't remember, she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. I can't remember anything. Ethan recoiled, stunned. Nothing? How could she not remember? He wanted to shake her, to demand answers, but he saw the emptiness in her eyes. She wasn't lying. She was lost, just like his mother had been all those years ago. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. What if she's connected to her? What if this woman had the answers he had been searching for all this time? He stood up, his mind racing. This wasn't just a coincidence. He had spent too many years hoping, searching, investigating dead ends. This was different. This was real. And this woman, whoever she was the key. Ethan's voice softened, but the intensity remained. I can help you. Let me help you. He didn't even know what he was offering: money, shelter, a doctor, maybe. Anything. Anything to get the answers. But the woman just shook her head, slowly, as if the very act of moving was exhausting. I don't need help, she whispered. I'm fine. You're not fine. Ethan snapped, louder than he intended. The desperation clawed at him. Why wouldn't she understand? You're sitting here in the middle of a storm, wearing the necklace of someone he stopped again. Too much. Too soon. She flinched at his tone, curling further into herself, the necklace dangling from her neck like some mocking relic of the past. Ethan forced himself to take a breath. He had to stay calm. He couldn't let the anger, the confusion, or the overwhelming sense of loss drown him. Not now. Not when he was this close. You said you don't remember anything, he began, kneeling down again, his eyes softening as he tried to connect with her. But maybe you do. Maybe there's something, some detail you've forgotten. Think. Where did you get this necklace? The woman frowned, her eyes flickering with the slightest hint of recognition, but then she shook her head again. I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. I just woke up with it. I don't remember anything before that. Ethan's heart sank. Woke up with it? What the hell did that even mean? He clenched his jaw, trying to keep his frustration in check. This was insane. How could she not know? How could she not remember? But the more he looked at her, the more he realized she really didn't know. This wasn't a game. She wasn't playing him. She was just as lost as he was. The rain kept pouring, and Ethan felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He didn't know why, but he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't leave her here. Not like this. Not with that necklace around her neck. He stood up, extending a hand to her. Come with me, he said, his voice steady, even though his mind was still spinning. I'll get you somewhere safe. We can figure this out. Together. The woman looked at him for a long moment, hesitation flickering in her eyes. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. The woman, this nameless stranger, sat in the passenger seat of Ethan Cole's car, her fingers wrapped tightly around the seatbelt as if it were her lifeline. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared out the window, her face ghostly pale in the soft glow of the city lights. Ethan drove in silence, his mind a whirlwind of questions and doubts. He kept glancing at her, his heart racing each time his eyes caught the gleam of the necklace around her neck. His mother's necklace. The air in the car was thick with tension, the low hum of the engine barely cutting through it. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He didn't even know where he was taking her, but he couldn't leave her on the street. She was the only connection he'd found in years, possibly the only lead he'd ever have to finding out what had really happened to his mother. The past 18 years had been filled with dead ends, each one more frustrating than the last. But this? This felt different. Real. Too real. They arrived at his apartment building, one of the most exclusive in the city, a towering monument of glass and steel. The security guard gave Ethan a nod as he pulled into the underground garage, but his eyes lingered on the woman in the passenger seat, curiosity and suspicion flickering in his gaze. Ethan ignored him, his mind still fixated on the mystery in front of him. As they stepped out of the car, the woman stumbled slightly, clearly weak. Ethan caught her arm to steady her, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was something behind her gaze, something just out of reach. A sliver of recognition, maybe? Or fear? Let's get you inside, he muttered, guiding her toward the elevator. She didn't resist, but she didn't speak either. The silence between them was suffocating. When they reached his apartment, Ethan quickly ushered her inside. The space was cold, sleek, and meticulously designed, everything in its place, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling inside him. He offered her a towel, watching as she wiped the rain from her face, her movements slow and mechanical, as though she was moving through water. Do you remember anything? He asked cautiously, unable to hold back his questions any longer. The words hung in the air like a challenge, as if he could will her to remember by sheer force. But the woman just shook her head, her expression distant, lost. I don't know anything, she whispered, her voice fragile, like something that could shatter at the slightest push. Ethan ran a hand through his damp hair, pacing the length of the room. This is getting me nowhere. He felt the frustration rising in his chest. He needed answers, needed them now, but pushing her too hard wouldn't help. He had to be patient. He had to think clearly, though his mind felt like it was unraveling. But patience wasn't something Ethan was known for. Not in business, not in life. He had built his empire on decisiveness, on never hesitating. And now he was faced with something far more important than his company. He was faced with his past, his mother's memory, and the possibility that this woman, this broken, fragile person, might hold the key to it all. But then, his phone buzzed. Ethan glanced at the screen and frowned. Tyler Jennings. Tyler was Ethan's second-in-command, his business partner, and the man Ethan trusted to run things when he wasn't around. But recently, Ethan had noticed cracks in that trust. Small things, discrepancies in reports, whispers of deals that didn't quite add up. Ethan had brushed them off at first, too focused on other matters, but now, with his head spinning from this new development, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. Reluctantly, he answered the call. "What is it, Tyler?" "Ethan," Tyler's voice crackled on the other end, sharp and impatient. "We've got a problem. A big one." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Not now." "What kind of problem?" "There's been a leak. One of our investors is backing out, claims they've got information that could sink us if it gets out." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of information?" "I don't know yet, but we're exposed. If this gets out." "I'll handle it," Ethan snapped, cutting him off. "Keep things under control until I get back." "You're not planning on coming back soon, are you?" Tyler's tone was accusatory, biting. "You've been distracted lately, Ethan. The board's starting to notice." Ethan bristled. "I'm handling things. Don't worry about it." But Tyler wasn't backing down. "This isn't just about the deal, Ethan. People are asking questions about you. About your priorities." Ethan's pulse quickened. He could feel the walls closing in. His business, the one thing he had absolute control over, was slipping through his fingers. And now, this woman. This necklace. It was all spiraling out of control. "I'll be back tomorrow," Ethan said coldly. "Just keep things from falling apart until then." He hung up before Tyler could respond, his mind racing. A leak? An investor pulling out? It was all happening too fast, too much. But Ethan wasn't the type to panic. He would deal with it, he always did. But right now, he had another problem to solve. He turned back to the woman, who was now sitting on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling slightly. The sight of her, so vulnerable and lost, made something twist in his gut. He couldn't just walk away from this, no matter how badly he wanted to. Before he could say anything, there was a knock on the door. Ethan's head snapped up, his muscles tensing. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door cautiously, and there stood Mark Thompson, the private investigator he had hired years ago to look into his mother's disappearance. Ethan hadn't heard from him in months, not since they'd hit another dead end in the case. "Ethan," Mark greeted him with a grim expression. "We need to talk." Ethan's pulse spiked. "What is it?" Mark's eyes flicked toward the woman on the couch. "It's about her. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe." Ethan's mind raced as he stepped outside into the hallway, closing the door behind him. "You know who she is?" His voice was low, urgent. Mark crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "No, but I've been hearing things. Weird things. You've been looking into your mother's case for years, but lately, people have started asking questions. And not just about your mother." "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's not just about the past anymore. Someone's digging into your business, Ethan. Someone powerful. Whoever she is, she's caught up in something much bigger than you realize." Ethan felt a cold chill run down his spine. Bigger than me? Who could possibly be pulling the strings? Mark leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. Listen, you know I've always had your back, but things are getting dangerous. You need to be careful. There are people, powerful people, who don't want you digging into the past. Ethan clenched his jaw. I don't care how dangerous it is. I need to know what happened to my mother. Mark sighed. I know. But Ethan, this woman. She might be the key, or she might be the trap. I've been hearing about some people moving in the shadows, people connected to old business dealings your family was involved in. The kind of people who won't hesitate to take you down if you get too close to the truth. Ethan's heart raced, but he couldn't back down now. I need answers, Mark. Mark hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right. I'll keep digging, but be careful. The deeper you go, the more dangerous this gets. Ethan nodded, but his mind was already spinning with possibilities. What had his family been involved in? What secrets had his mother kept from him all those years ago? And who was this woman, really? He had thought she was just a lost soul, a victim of some terrible fate, but now it felt like she was at the center of something much darker. Ethan returned to the apartment, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. He glanced at the woman on the couch, her face pale, her body still trembling slightly. Who was she? And how had she ended up with his mother's necklace? We need to talk, he said, sitting across from her. I need to know who you are. Everything. What do you remember? What happened to you? The woman looked at him, her eyes wide, terrified. I don't remember, she whispered. I swear, I don't. I woke up one day. And I was just here. I don't know who I am. I don't know how I got this. She clutched the necklace tightly, as if it were the only thing holding her together. Ethan's frustration bubbled to the surface. He couldn't take it anymore. How could she not know? How could she have no memory, no answers? His mother's necklace, his life, his business, it was all unraveling, and this woman was at the center of it. Before he could say anything else, his phone buzzed again. Another message from Tyler. Another problem. Ethan felt the weight of everything crashing down on him. His business was on the verge of collapse, his family's secrets were catching up to him, and this woman, this enigma, was the only thread he had to hold on to. He stood up, pacing the room. I don't have time for this, he muttered. I don't have time for any of this. But as he looked back at the woman, so fragile, so lost, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not yet. I'm going to find out who you are, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. And I'm going to find out what happened to my mother. Ethan stood in front of the large floor-to-ceiling windows of his apartment, staring out into the city. The skyline, bathed in the soft glow of lights piercing through the rain, seemed like a distant world, one that had slipped out of his control. His reflection in the glass was a distorted figure, almost unrecognizable. Behind him, the nameless woman sat on the couch, still gripping the necklace like a lifeline, her presence the only tangible connection to his past. But everything else in Ethan's life was spiraling. His business was on the verge of collapse. The pressure from Tyler and the board, combined with the mystery of this woman, was a suffocating weight on his chest. He had always been a man of action, but now, for the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless. Mark's warning echoed in his mind. There are people, powerful people, who don't want you digging into the past. The idea that someone could be controlling things from the shadows had unsettled him deeply. His mother's disappearance had always seemed like a personal tragedy, but now it felt like part of something much bigger. And much more dangerous. Ethan turned away from the window, the frustration boiling beneath the surface. He needed answers, but none were coming. Tell me again, Ethan said, his voice tight as he faced the woman. You don't remember anything? No flashes of memory? No sense of who you were before you woke up on that street? The woman looked up at him with weary eyes, her face a portrait of confusion and fear. I told you. I don't remember. It's all blank. I just woke up. And this was around my neck. She tugged gently at the necklace. I don't know how I got it. I don't know why. Ethan clenched his fists, pacing back and forth. There has to be something, he muttered. Some clue. Some connection to my mother. You can't just be a coincidence. I'm sorry, she whispered. I wish I could help you. Her voice was soft, almost childlike, and for a moment, Ethan felt a pang of guilt. She wasn't the enemy here. She was as much a victim of this as he was. But still, the frustration gnawed at him. How could she remember nothing? Just as he was about to press her further, his phone rang, breaking the tense silence. He glanced at the screen. Tyler. What is it now? Ethan barked into the phone, his patience wearing thin. Tyler's voice came through, agitated and sharp. Ethan, you need to get back to the office. Now. I told you, I'm handling things. Whatever it is, deal with it. No, Ethan. This is serious. There's been a breach, someone got access to the financials. Our investors are pulling out faster than we can control. And that's not all, there's a leak about the board restructuring. It's all over the news. Ethan froze. His entire body went cold. What do you mean, all over the news? Tyler's voice lowered, as if bracing for the impact. Your reputation is on the line. They're saying you've been covering up losses, hiding money offshore. If this gets any worse, it's not just the company on the line, it's your career. Everything you've built. Ethan's mind raced. Covering up losses? Offshore accounts? None of this made sense. He'd been meticulous in his business dealings, ensuring everything was clean. But this? This was a full-blown attack. Someone was deliberately trying to destroy him. Who leaked this? Ethan demanded, his voice a dangerous growl. We don't know. But the damage is done. You need to get back here now. The board's calling for a meeting, and... well, they're talking about your removal as CEO. Ethan gripped the phone so tightly he thought it might crack. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up, his heart pounding in his chest. The betrayal was like a punch to the gut. Tyler had been acting suspicious for weeks now, but this? This was a power play, a calculated move to take him down. And with the board already on edge, it was only a matter of time before they turned on him. Ethan spun around, the tension in the room thickening. The woman watched him carefully, sensing the shift in his mood. What's happening? She asked softly, her voice cutting through the storm of his thoughts. Ethan didn't answer right away. His mind was too busy trying to piece together the puzzle. Everything was unraveling at once, his business, his search for the truth, and now this woman with his mother's necklace, tied to a mystery that went deeper than he could have imagined. And then, suddenly, it hit him. The realization was like ice in his veins. What if she wasn't just a victim? What if you're part of this? Ethan whispered, his voice hardening as he stared at the woman. What if you're not just some random person on the street? What if you were put in my path, by someone who wanted me distracted? Someone who knew I would drop everything to find out about my mother? The woman's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. No, she shook her head, panic rising in her voice. I swear, I don't know anything. I don't remember anything. But Ethan wasn't sure anymore. His paranoia was growing, the lines between friend and enemy blurring. You could be lying, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You could have been sent to derail me. To make me question everything. And I fell for it. Tears welled in the woman's eyes, and she shook her head more fiercely. No, please, I don't know anything. I swear I don't. I didn't ask for this, I didn't even know who you were until you found me. Ethan stepped back, his mind spinning out of control. Was this all part of some elaborate plan? Had someone used his desperation for answers against him? The thought made his stomach churn. He was losing control, and he didn't know who to trust anymore. And then, the knock on the door. Ethan turned sharply, his heart in his throat. He wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, he crossed the room and opened the door. Standing on the other side was Tyler, his face set in a mask of cold determination. "Tyler," Ethan said, his voice thick with suspicion. "What the hell are you doing here?" Tyler stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the woman. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Then, without a word, he turned back to Ethan. "We need to talk," Tyler said, his voice cold. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "About what? About the fact that someone's trying to take me down? Or about how you've been acting like you're in on it?" Tyler's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the center of the room, his posture stiff, almost military-like. When he finally spoke, his words were deliberate. Measured. "I didn't want it to come to this," Tyler began, his voice low. "But you've left me no choice." Ethan's heart sank. "No choice? What the hell are you talking about?" Tyler's eyes flickered with something dark, something dangerous. "This was never about the company." "Not really. The investors pulling out, the leaks, those are just distractions." Ethan took a step forward, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Distractions from what?" Tyler smiled then, but it was cold, devoid of any real emotion. "From the truth. From your mother. From what really happened 18 years ago." The air left Ethan's lungs. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might explode. You know what happened?" "I know everything," Tyler said quietly, almost casually, as if revealing the darkest secret of Ethan's life was nothing more than a routine business deal. "I've always known. Your mother didn't disappear. She was taken." Ethan stumbled back, the room spinning around him. He felt like the floor had just dropped out from under him. "What? Taken by who?" Tyler stepped closer, his expression darkening. "Taken by people who wanted to send a message. People who didn't want your family to rise any higher in the business world. But your father didn't listen. He kept pushing, kept growing the company, kept making enemies. And when your mother disappeared, he knew exactly why." Ethan's legs felt like they were about to give out beneath him. "No. That's not possible. My father." "Your father covered it up," Tyler said, his voice sharp. "He made it look like she just vanished. But he knew who was responsible. He knew, and he did nothing." The rage that had been building inside Ethan suddenly exploded. He lunged forward, grabbing Tyler by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "You're lying," he shouted, his voice shaking with fury. "You're lying. My father would never." "I'm not lying," Tyler growled, shoving Ethan off of him. "Your father let her go to protect his business. And now, years later, those same people are coming after you. They don't want the truth to come out. And they sure as hell don't want you digging into the past." Ethan's mind reeled. Everything he thought he knew was collapsing around him. His father, his hero, the man who had built their empire, had let his mother be taken? Had sacrificed her for the company? "You're insane," Ethan muttered, backing away from Tyler, his hands trembling. "You don't know what you're talking about." Tyler straightened his collar, his face hardening. "Believe what you want. But the truth is coming for you, Ethan. And it's not going to be pretty." Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at Tyler, the betrayal slicing through him like a knife. He had trusted Tyler, had built his entire business with him by his side, and now this? What do you want? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tyler's eyes flicked to the woman on the couch, then back to Ethan. I want what's best for the company. For both of us. But if you keep chasing ghosts, you're going to destroy everything. Ethan's chest tightened. I'm not going to stop, he said, his voice firm. I'm going to find out what happened to my mother, and I'm going to take down anyone who tries to stop me. Tyler sighed, as if disappointed. Then you've already lost. With that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Ethan standing in the center of the room, his world shattered. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the room, the echo of Tyler's footsteps still lingering in the air. The apartment, once his sanctuary, now felt suffocating, its sleek design closing in on him. His mind was spinning. Tyler's words rang in his ears, your father let her go to protect his business. His father. The man he had idolized. The man who had been his pillar of strength, the foundation of everything he had built. Could it be true? Could the man he had modeled his life after have been the reason his mother was taken? The idea was too monstrous to accept, yet it gnawed at him, tearing apart everything he thought he knew. Ethan felt a cold sweat break across his skin. He had spent years searching for the truth about his mother's disappearance, clinging to the hope that she had been lost somewhere, somehow, because of a terrible accident or circumstance beyond anyone's control. But this? If Tyler was right, if his father had let it happen. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. How could he have lived with it? Ethan? The woman's voice was soft, almost hesitant. She was still sitting on the couch, clutching the necklace that had triggered this unraveling nightmare. Her wide eyes were filled with fear, and something else, concern. He looked at her, and for a moment, everything blurred. This woman, who had stumbled into his life with no memory of who she was or how she had come to wear his mother's necklace, was now tangled in a web of lies and violence that stretched back nearly 2 decades. Was she truly innocent? Or was she part of the trap, as Tyler suggested? Ethan's chest tightened with frustration and doubt. He could feel his control slipping. He wanted to lash out, to scream, to demand the truth. But none of it would change what was already in motion. I need to think, Ethan muttered, turning away from her. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he stormed out of the room, leaving her behind in a cloud of confusion. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe. The drive to his office was a blur. Rain pounded against the windshield, the city's lights distorted by the storm. Ethan could barely keep his mind focused on the road. Every thought was consumed by the betrayal, the lies, the idea that his father might have sacrificed his mother for the sake of the company. As he arrived at the towering glass building that housed Cole Enterprises, the enormity of the situation hit him. Tyler had said the leaks were out in the open now. The media was circling like vultures, waiting to feast on any shred of scandal. And the board? The board was likely already plotting to oust him. Ethan's pulse quickened as he strode through the lobby, the familiar surroundings feeling foreign. The employees who usually greeted him with respect barely met his gaze, their eyes darting away, whispers buzzing in his wake. News spread fast in a corporation like his. They knew something was happening, and everyone was on edge. He took the elevator up to the executive floor, each floor passing like the ticking of a clock counting down to his fall. By the time the doors slid open, Ethan was steeling himself for what was to come. The boardroom was full. Every member of the board sat around the sleek, polished table, their faces tense. At the head of the table, Tyler sat with an air of quiet authority. Ethan felt a surge of anger rise in his chest at the sight of him. Tyler had been part of this betrayal all along, manipulating events behind the scenes. Ethan, Tyler began, his voice measured and calm, as if he hadn't just ripped the ground out from under him. We've called this meeting to address the situation. You've no doubt heard about the leaks by now. Ethan took his seat, his jaw clenched. I've heard. But what I haven't heard is how you let it happen. Tyler raised an eyebrow. This isn't about blame. It's about containment. The leaks are out, and the media is going to run with it. We need to get ahead of this, and we need a leader who can steady the ship. Ethan's eyes narrowed. And I suppose you think that's you? There was a murmur around the table. Some of the board members exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. Tyler's expression didn't change, but there was a glint of triumph in his eyes. We need a leader who can make hard decisions, Ethan. Someone who isn't distracted by personal matters. Personal matters. The phrase hung in the air, a sharp reminder of the growing storm surrounding Ethan's life. The whispers about his obsession with finding his mother had been growing for years, and now Tyler was using it against him. Ethan's hands curled into fists beneath the table. You mean someone who's willing to sell out his partner? Someone who's willing to betray the very person who built this company? Tyler leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You're the one who betrayed this company the moment you let your personal life get in the way of business. The investors are nervous, Ethan. The leaks have shaken their confidence, and now they're questioning your leadership. Ethan felt a rush of heat rise to his face. His heart pounded in his chest, his pulse throbbing in his temples. You're the one who orchestrated this, he spat. You've been planning this for weeks, haven't you? All the while pretending to be my ally. Tyler didn't deny it. He simply looked at Ethan, his gaze cold and calculating. I did what I had to do. For the company. For yourself, Ethan shot back. You've always been waiting for the moment to take over. And now you're using the board to do it. One of the board members, an older man named Gregory Lynch, cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Ethan, this isn't just about Tyler. We've all been concerned about the direction of the company for some time. The leaks have damaged our reputation, and the investors are pulling back. We need to stabilize the situation. Ethan looked around the table, his eyes scanning the faces of people he had trusted, people who had stood by his side as he built Cole Enterprises into the powerhouse it was today. But now they were ready to turn on him. Fear and greed had eroded their loyalty, leaving them willing to follow Tyler's lead. I'm not stepping down, Ethan said firmly, his voice cold. This is my company. I built it. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else take it from me. There was a beat of silence. Then Tyler stood, straightening his jacket. We've already voted, Ethan. The decision has been made. You're being removed as CEO, effective immediately. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He stared at Tyler, his breath catching in his throat. You can't do this. Tyler's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. I can. And I have. The room was deathly silent as Ethan rose from his seat. He could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him, the enormity of what had just happened sinking in. His entire world, everything he had worked for, was crumbling before his eyes. But as he stood there, something shifted inside him. The fear, the anger, the confusion, they all coalesced into a single, burning determination. They might have taken his company, but they hadn't taken his will. This isn't over, Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with a steely resolve. Not by a long shot. He turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the stunned silence of the people who had betrayed him. Back in his apartment, the storm outside mirrored the chaos raging inside him. Rain pelted the windows as Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. The loss of his company stung, but it wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was the revelation about his father. The man who had shaped his entire life, the man who had taught him everything he knew about business and power, had been hiding a terrible secret. Ethan stood abruptly, his anger fueling him. He couldn't sit still, couldn't let this eat away at him. He needed to do something, needed to find out the truth once and for all. He grabbed his phone and dialed Mark's number. The phone rang several times before Mark answered, his voice groggy. "Ethan? It's late. What's going on?" "I need to know everything," Ethan said, his voice sharp with urgency. "About my mother. About my father. About whatever the hell has been going on for the last 18 years. I want the truth, Mark. All of it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment Ethan thought Mark might refuse. But then he sighed, his voice weary. "All right. I'll meet you at the usual place." An hour later, Ethan found himself standing outside a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was thick with tension. He could feel it in his bones, a sense that everything was about to change. Mark was already there, waiting by the entrance. His face was grim as he waved Ethan inside. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," Mark said as they stepped into the dimly lit space. "What you're about to hear. It's going to change everything. You sure you're ready for that?" "I don't have a choice," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "Tell me." Mark exhaled slowly, then began to speak. "Your mother's disappearance wasn't random. She was taken by a group that your father had crossed in the business world, powerful people with deep connections. They were involved in illegal dealings, things your father refused to get into. But when he pushed them too far, they sent a message." Ethan's stomach churned. "And my father did nothing?" Mark hesitated, his eyes flicking to the ground. "He tried to fight it, at first. But when they made it clear that they would destroy everything, his business, his reputation, even you, he backed down. He made a deal with them. He let them take your mother, in exchange for leaving the rest of the family alone." The weight of Mark's words hit Ethan like a freight train. His father had known. He had known all along, and he had done nothing. He had let his mother be taken, sacrificed her to protect his empire. Ethan's chest tightened as the full scope of the betrayal sank in. The anger he had been holding back exploded to the surface. He slammed his fist into the wall, the pain a sharp, welcome distraction from the storm of emotions tearing through him. "How do I find them?" Ethan growled, his voice low and dangerous. Mark's eyes met his, the warning clear. "Ethan, this isn't just some business deal gone wrong. These people are dangerous. They've been operating in the shadows for years, and they won't hesitate to kill to protect their secrets. Going after them. It could destroy you." "I don't care," Ethan snapped. "I've already lost everything. My company. My father. My mother. I'm not stopping until I find them." Mark nodded slowly, resigned. "All right. But if you go down this path, there's no turning back." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe. In the days that followed, Ethan threw himself into the hunt. Armed with the information Mark had uncovered, he began digging into his father's past, following every lead, every whisper, every hidden connection. He spent sleepless nights combing through documents, making phone calls, meeting with old contacts. And slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. He uncovered the names of the people responsible for his mother's disappearance, the shadowy figures who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes for years. Their influence reached deep into the business world, into politics, into every corner of power. But Ethan didn't care. He was going to take them down, no matter the cost. His obsession consumed him. He stopped answering calls from friends, from the few allies he had left. His apartment became a war room, filled with maps, documents, and red string connecting every clue. He barely ate, barely slept, his entire existence focused on one thing: revenge. The woman, the one who had started this whole journey, remained a silent presence in his life. She had recovered some of her strength, but her memory was still shattered. She stayed with him, though, offering quiet support, as if she understood that her fate was tied to his. And then, one night, Ethan got the break he had been waiting for. A name. A location. The man who had orchestrated his mother's kidnapping, the man who had been behind everything, was hiding in plain sight. Ethan armed himself. He was done waiting. He was done being a victim. It was time to end this. The old mansion was perched on the edge of the city, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. But Ethan wasn't afraid. He had come too far, sacrificed too much to turn back now. He slipped through the gates, his movements quiet and precise. He had prepared for this moment for weeks, rehearsed every step in his mind. When he reached the main house, he found the door unlocked. They were expecting him. Ethan stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The hallway was dimly lit, the silence oppressive. And then, from the shadows, a voice. "I knew you'd come." Ethan turned, his hand tightening around the gun in his jacket. The man standing before him was older, his face lined with age, but there was a cold, calculating intelligence in his eyes. He smiled, a thin, cruel smile. "Your father would be proud," the man said. "He fought, too. In the beginning." Ethan's pulse quickened. "This ends tonight." The man tilted his head, studying him. "You think you can end this? You think you can take down everything I've built?" "I don't care about what you've built," Ethan growled. "I'm here for my mother." The man's smile faltered, just for a moment. But then he straightened, his expression hardening. "Your mother was collateral. Just like you'll be." Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised the gun, his hands steady. "I'm not my father." And with that, he pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed in the mansion's vast, empty halls, followed by a deafening silence. Ethan stood there, his breath ragged, the gun trembling in his hand. His heart pounded in his chest, and the weight of what he'd done crashed over him like a tidal wave. The man responsible for his mother's disappearance lay crumpled on the floor, the life draining from his eyes. It was over. But the victory felt hollow. There was no rush of relief, no sense of triumph. Instead, a deep, aching emptiness filled Ethan's chest. He had spent years chasing the truth, driven by a burning desire for revenge, and now that he had it, all he felt was the suffocating weight of what he had lost along the way. His mother was gone. His father had betrayed everything he stood for. His company, his life's work, had been stolen from him. And now, standing over the man who had caused it all, Ethan felt no closer to peace. He felt shattered. He lowered the gun slowly, his hand numb as the weapon slipped from his grasp and hit the floor with a soft clatter. His legs gave out beneath him, and he sank to his knees beside the body. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound the ragged rhythm of his breathing. Ethan stared at the lifeless figure before him, a strange, unsettling calm settling over him. This man had taken everything from him, but even in death, he didn't look like the monster Ethan had imagined. He looked human. Weak. Fragile. For years, Ethan had built this moment up in his mind, believing that killing this man would bring him closure, that it would finally allow him to move on. But now, staring down at the blood pooling on the marble floor, he realized something painful. There was no going back. What he had lost could never be reclaimed. His mother was never coming back. The company he had built, the relationships he had destroyed in his obsessive quest for justice, all of it was gone. And nothing he did now, no matter how many enemies he took down, would bring it back. A door creaked open behind him, and Ethan turned to see the woman, the one who had unknowingly set all of this in motion, standing in the doorway, her face pale and stricken. She looked at him with a mix of fear and sorrow, her hands trembling at her sides. "Ethan," her voice was a whisper, heavy with concern. He looked up at her, his eyes hollow, his mind spinning. She stepped forward cautiously, her eyes darting to the man's body on the floor, then back to Ethan. "It's over," she said softly, almost as if trying to convince herself. You did it. You found him." Ethan shook his head slowly, his voice barely audible. It's not over. The woman knelt beside him, her presence gentle, her eyes searching his face for some sign of hope, some glimmer of the man he had been before all of this. But all she saw was a man who had been broken by the weight of his own vengeance. "I thought this would bring me peace," Ethan murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought if I found him, if I made him pay, I could move on. But now—" He trailed off, his gaze drifting back to the body. His throat tightened, and he swallowed hard. "Now I don't even know who I am anymore." The woman placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but reassuring. "You're not the man who did this," she said softly. "You're not the man your father was. You've been through hell, Ethan, but you're still here. You're still fighting. That means something." Ethan closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him. But the pain in his chest didn't fade. It twisted and turned, an open wound that refused to heal. He had become so consumed by his need for revenge that he had lost sight of everything else, of who he was, of what really mattered. But maybe that was the lesson in all of this. Maybe, in the end, there were no neat resolutions, no easy answers. Maybe life was messier than that, more complicated. Maybe, sometimes, the hardest part wasn't finding the truth. It was learning how to live with it. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at the woman beside him. She had been through her own ordeal, lost in a world she didn't remember, searching for her own identity. And yet, she was still here, still standing. Maybe he could learn from her. "I don't know where to go from here," Ethan admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "I've lost everything." The woman smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "Then maybe it's time to start over." Ethan blinked, the simplicity of her words cutting through the fog in his mind. Start over. Could it really be that simple? Could he, after everything, rebuild himself? Rebuild his life? He wasn't sure. But as he looked into the woman's eyes, he realized that maybe he didn't need all the answers right now. Maybe the first step was simply acknowledging that the past didn't have to define his future. That the man who had been driven by revenge didn't have to be the man he became. Slowly, Ethan rose to his feet, feeling the weight of his decision still heavy on his shoulders, but somehow lighter now that he had made the choice to let go of the anger, to let go of the obsession. He wasn't free, not yet, but he had taken the first step. The woman stood with him, her hand still resting on his arm, grounding him in the present. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Ethan looked around the room, the storm outside still raging, the rain tapping against the windows. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel the desperate need to know everything. He didn't feel the crushing weight of having to fix the unfixable. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But I think it's time to walk away from all of this. From the business. From the revenge." The woman nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Maybe that's the best thing you can do." Ethan turned to face her fully, something shifting inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't the blinding, overwhelming kind, but a small spark. And for now, that was enough. "I don't know where this road leads," he said, his voice stronger now. "But I'm ready to find out." They stood there for a moment, two people who had been broken by the past but who had found the strength to face the future, together, perhaps, or maybe just side by side for a little longer. But whatever lay ahead, Ethan knew he would no longer be defined by the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. And as they stepped out into the night, the storm finally began to break. Before you go, if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and become part of our journey. We're just getting started, and we want you with us every step of the way. Tell us in the comments, what moment hit you the hardest? We're all about real conversations, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts. Your insights make this community stronger. And don't miss out. Up next is a story that will grip your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. click the video that's waiting for you right now.